Hi, this is the first video in a series that will be walking you through how to build a full stack application. Um, this is part of the Galvanize curriculum, and so I will be teaching as if you have some background of what's going on. Awesome. Oh, by the way, my name's Lisa, and thanks for watching this video. I hope that it helps you grasp quarter two a lot better. So this first video will be talking about the big picture of a full stack application. What are the components? How are they hooked up together? And what are the technologies that we'll be using for each of these components of a full stack app? Cool. So briefly, the full stack application is made out of two parts. One that we call the front end and another we call the back end. The front end is really what's visible to the user. So in our case, that would be a web page. Here you can see I've sort of drawn a mock-up or wireframe of a very simple login page. There are events such as logging in that will trigger HTTP requests. These events will be things that require the manipulation or creation of data in the back end. Speaking of the back end, it's made out of two parts, the server and the database. So the database is the collection of data that the app persists. So if this were a blog, for example, you would have the user, the posts, and the comments. The users would contain information such as their name, their password, after it's been encrypted, of course, some brief summary like a little bio, their profile picture, etc. And the server is very logic heavy. It handles the manipulation of data depending on the contents of that HTTP request that's caused by the event initially triggered from the front end. So it's a set of rules that will interpret the request and figure out what to do and send an appropriate response back. In our case, for example, if we get something like an invalid password or a username that doesn't exist in our database, indicating that this person who's put in their information is not a registered user of our app, then the appropriate HTTP response to send back would contain an error that would then be rendered on the front end with an error message such as, please enter a valid username and password. On the other hand, if the user's info is legitimate, they are a user in our database, and their password matches up with the one we have on record, then we want to access that user's info, for example, their profile picture, etc., and render it on the front end on their profile page. So, to summarize and walk through it one more time, on the front end you have your user interface. Events will trigger HTTP requests, and you'll know which events to look out for because they involve the creation or manipulation of data that's stored in the backend. This data is stored in a database. The server is the middleman between the front end and the database to handle these HTTP requests. They interpret the request, look at the data sent, for example, and figure out what to do. A lot of times that involves accessing the database for the user's information or for other information, and then sending it back in an HTTP response that then renders itself on the front end appropriately. Otherwise, it would be an error that's also rendered in the front end. So basically, the server will connect the front end and the back end, send a response that's appropriate, and then in the front end, the user will see that in the form of a nice error message or their actual data being manifested. Cool. So in this video series, we'll be using all kinds of technologies to build this full stack application. For the front end, we'll be using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery, just like always. Then, to handle the events that trigger HTTP requests, we will be building our server with Express.js, which is a Node package that's built on top of the Node HTTP module. It allows us to create a server in a more syntactically aesthetic and easy to understand way. After our server interprets the request and figures out what to do, and that's all code that we write, it will then interact with the database using Connects. Connects is a SQL query builder. So SQL is the language we use in order to get data from our database. Our database is contained in a management system called Postgres. And then Connects is sort of JavaScript that is sort of like SQL, and it sort of keeps it so that our entire stack is in JavaScript, which is pretty nice. Okay, so in the case that we do interact with the database or we want to render an error, we'll be sending that information back in an HTTP response. And that will be rendered dynamically in the front end using a templating engine called Handlebars. If you are lost on any of these technologies or how to use them, the docs for all of these technologies are in the description below, as well as in the Galvanize curriculum. I hope this sort of cleared up what a full stack means, a front end, back end, some rules in between that interpret the HTTP request triggered by events on the front end, and the manipulation of data in the database depending on that request. So I'm very excited for the next few videos to walk you through how to build a full stack app with these technologies. Thank you so much for watching, and happy coding.